This
She was
situation requires our
DEENDD,
immediate attention. We
unmarriageable.
cannot
Her
afford
father
any
handed
further
her and her
delays.
puppy to the
I agree
slave,
completely.
not knowing he was the Duke. The forest beyond whispered secrets to itself, as if it knew the fate that awaited those who dared tread near. Within the manor, Leora moved slowly through the grand hallway, her small hands clutching the hem of her gown. The air smelled faintly of dust, candle wax, and old magic, a reminder that time here had a weight of its own. Leora had always known she was different. Frail in body, quiet in voice, she had been deemed unmarriageable by her peers, a label that weighed heavily on her young heart. Her father, Lord Therne, had long since given up on attempting to mold her into the image of a proper lady. Instead, he avoided her presence, leaving her in the care of maids and servants who did little more than watch over her. And now, on this cold morning, everything was about to change. Lord Therne stood in the center of the great hall, his expression sharp and impatient. Beside him a man knelt, head bowed, shoulders stiff and strong. He was a servant, or so the world thought, but there was a fire in his eyes, a quiet strength that could not be hidden. Leora's pulse quickened, a mixture of curiosity and unease curling in her chest. "This is your responsibility now," her father said, gesturing toward her. "Take her and the creature," he added, nodding toward the small puppy trotting beside Leora, its black fur shining against the gray stone floor. "She is difficult, and I am done managing her. Keep her safe." The servant inclined his head, silent. There was no hesitation, no comment, only that stillness that seemed to hold power in its calm. Leora's stomach twisted with anxiety. She had known many servants in her life, but none had ever drawn her attention like this one. "I am ready," Leora whispered, though her voice trembled. She knelt to pat Bramble's head, and the little dog nuzzled her hand in quiet reassurance. The servant, without a word, opened the heavy door to the courtyard, and Leora followed, her heart racing. Outside, the morning mist wrapped around them like a cloak. Leora shivered but tried to stand tall, refusing to show fear. She glanced at the servant, who walked with a steady, unhurried pace, his dark cloak brushing the ground. Every step he took seemed deliberate, filled with hidden strength and command. She could not help but feel that there was more to him than met the eye. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The servant did not answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was low, measured, yet carried the weight of authority. "To a safe place," he said simply. "You will learn soon enough why your father sent you away." Leora swallowed hard, uncertain what to expect. She had imagined many possibilities: a distant relative, a small village, even a quiet convent where she could fade into obscurity. But there was something about this man, his quiet control and unwavering gaze, that made her pulse quicken with both fear and anticipation. As they walked, the forest grew denser. Ancient trees with gnarled branches arched overhead, casting shadows that danced in the morning mist. Leora felt a strange sense of foreboding, as though the forest itself were alive, observing her, testing her. Bramble growled softly, his small body tense, sensing the unease she tried to hide. "You have no reason to fear," the servant said, reading her hesitation like an open book. "I will not harm you." I know," Leora whispered, more to convince herself than him. Her heart, though small and timid, carried a stubborn courage she did not yet understand. She had survived life at Everdawn Manor. She could survive this too. The journey seemed to stretch on endlessly. Mist turned to fog, and the sun struggled to pierce through the dense canopy above. Leora's mind wandered, wondering about the man who walked beside her. He spoke little, and when he did, it was always in a calm, controlled manner. She tried to imagine his life, what hardships he had endured, what secrets he carried. But she could not. There was an aura about him that made him feel untouchable, yet strangely human too. After hours of walking, they reached a large estate surrounded by high walls and guarded gates. The servant approached without hesitation, speaking a few words to the sentries, who bowed and allowed them entry. Leora followed, her pulse quickening at the sight of the sprawling estate. It was grand, far more magnificent than her own home. The air felt charged, as though the very stones held whispers of ancient power. Inside, the estate was quiet, almost eerily so. The halls were wide and lined with dark portraits, their painted eyes seeming to follow her every movement. Candles flickered in sconces along the walls, casting dancing shadows that made the silence feel alive. Leora clutched Bramble to her chest, feeling the warmth of her little companion soothe her nerves. "You may rest here for now," the servant said, leading her to a room at the far end of the corridor. "But do not wander. There are things in this place, things that are not as they seem." Leora nodded, curiosity and fear warring within her. As he left, she watched his figure disappear into the shadows of the hallway. There was something commanding, almost magnetic about him. She shivered not from cold but from the strange pull she felt toward him. Night fell quickly, cloaking the estate in darkness. Leora lay in bed, listening to the wind sigh through the tall windows. Bramble curled at her feet, his soft breathing a steady comfort. She thought about her father, about the life she had left behind, and about the mysterious servant who now held her fate. She could not sleep. Something in the air, something unspoken, kept her senses alert. From the shadows of the corridor she thought she glimpsed movement, a figure watching silently. Her heart raced, but there was no fear, only a strange sense of being seen, truly seen, for perhaps the first time in her life. Days passed in a blur. Leora learned the rhythms of the estate, the quiet routines, and the people who served in the background. Yet Cale, the man she had come to know as her caretaker, remained distant, always observing, always present but never intrusive. There were moments when his gaze lingered, brief and intense, and Leora felt as if he were trying to read the thoughts she had kept hidden even from herself. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Leora ventured near the garden, Bramble at her heels. She found Cale standing among the shadows of tall hedges, his figure tall and imposing, the last rays of sunlight glinting off the dark lines of his armor. "Do you walk the gardens often?" she asked, her voice soft. "I walk where I am needed," he replied. His tone was calm, almost distant, but there was a weight behind his words, an unspoken meaning. Leora hesitated, unsure how to bridge the gap between them, but Bramble barked softly, nudging her hand as if urging her forward. Why did my father send me to you?" she asked. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. Cale's expression softened, just for a moment, before returning to its usual calm. "Because you are in danger," he said simply. "There are forces at work you cannot yet understand. I am here to protect you from them, and sometimes from yourself." Leora's heart ached with a mixture of fear and fascination. She sensed that Cale carried secrets heavier than the world itself, and that her own fate was entwined with his in ways she could not yet grasp. Will I be safe?" she asked, the words almost catching in her throat. He regarded her silently for a long moment. Then, with a voice that was low and steady, he said, "For now, but the world does not yield to promises, only to courage." The words settled over her like a quiet storm. Leora felt the weight of her life shifting, the fragile balance between fear and bravery, safety and danger. She clutched Bramble closer, feeling a spark of determination grow within her. Perhaps she was not as helpless as the world believed. Perhaps she could rise, even from this uncertain place, and claim a strength she had never known. But even as she resolved this, the shadows seemed to lengthen, curling around the edges of the estate like silent sentinels. She could feel eyes upon her, unseen and unblinking, and a shiver ran down her spine. Somewhere in the darkness, Cale watched as well, not just for her safety but for something deeper, something that neither of them could yet name. And in that moment, Leora understood that her life had changed forever. The path ahead would be fraught with danger, mystery, and power she had yet to comprehend. But it was also filled with a strange, thrilling possibility that perhaps, in this place of shadows and secrets, she might find not only safety, but a kind of belonging she had never imagined. Her heart tightened as she thought of the man who had brought her here, whose presence loomed over her days like a shadow and a light at once. She did not yet know his name, nor the full extent of his power. But she felt with a certainty that surprised her that her fate and his were now bound together. And somewhere deep inside, a small spark of hope began to burn. The palace of Everdon stood tall, a fortress of black stone and ivy that clung like memory to its walls. Even in daylight, the halls felt alive, whispering in corners where shadows lingered and portraits of stern ancestors stared with unyielding eyes. Leora walked carefully, Bramble at her heels, her heart caught between awe and unease. Since arriving, she had noticed the small details that marked this place as more than a home. Candles flickered even when there was no breeze, and sometimes she felt that the walls themselves listened. Footsteps echoed when no one walked, and doors seemed to open and close on their own. Leora had learned quickly to speak softly, to observe quietly, and to trust only those who had shown kindness. Cale moved through the halls like a shadow of the building itself, silent, deliberate, always watching. Even when he was not near, she felt the weight of his presence, as though he was always just behind her, guarding her from unseen dangers. She did not yet understand him, but a strange pull drew her attention to him again and again. "You move like a ghost in these halls," she said one afternoon, as she followed him from the library to the training yard. Bramble tugged at her skirts, impatient to run alongside Cale's measured stride. Cale did not turn. "Ghosts are useful," he replied, his voice calm, even as if every word had been carefully weighed. "They observe without being noticed. They protect without drawing attention." Leora tilted her head, curious. "And do you protect me like a ghost?" For a moment he stopped. His dark eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. "I protect you as needed," he said, then continued walking, leaving her with a flutter of unease and fascination. It was in the small courtyard that Leora first realized the full extent of the palace's secrets. The fountain at its center was old, carved with creatures that seemed almost alive, their mouths open in silent songs. Statues of heroes long forgotten watched from every corner, and the air was heavy with the scent of jasmine and rain. "Why did my father send me here?" she asked aloud, though mostly to herself. Bramble yipped and pawed at her hand as if urging her to speak. Cale appeared silently, as though he had stepped from the shadows themselves. "Because you are not safe where you were," he said, his eyes briefly scanning the courtyard, alert. "There are those who wish to use your bloodline for their own gain. There are powers in the world that see weakness as an opportunity. You are neither weak nor helpless, but they do not know this." Leora felt a shiver. I never imagined anyone would want to harm me," she admitted. "I have always been hidden, unimportant." "You are far from unimportant," Cale said, his voice low and insistent. "Even the smallest spark can start a fire, and you are a spark, Leora, I see it. Perhaps even you do not." Her heart thumped at the intensity of his words. She wanted to believe him, yet a part of her was afraid that his concern masked something deeper, something she could not yet name. Days turned into weeks, and Leora began to adjust to life in the palace. She learned the names of servants and attendants, the rules of the great halls, and the small ways to avoid attracting attention from those who might resent her presence. Yet no lesson prepared her for the subtle tension that threaded every interaction with Cale. He was both protector and enigma, his power evident but never flaunted, his gaze always watchful. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, Leora wandered into the east wing of the palace, where the light fell softly across the tall windows. She discovered a small library, shelves filled with books that smelled of old paper and secrets. She ran her fingers across the spines, marveling at the knowledge stored within these walls. You enjoy reading, Kale said from the doorway, startling her. She had not heard him approach. I suppose I do, she said, cheeks flushing. There is so much to learn, so many worlds in these pages. Kale stepped into the room, his eyes lingering on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Books are dangerous, he said softly. They teach more than you might be ready to know. They can change a person. I want to change, she whispered almost to herself. I do not want to be weak. I want to matter. For a long moment, Kale said nothing. Then he moved closer, not threatening, but with the quiet authority of someone who carries weight far beyond her understanding. Then you must learn to embrace the shadows as well as the light, he said. Strength comes from knowing both. You cannot protect yourself by hiding. You must face what you fear. Leora felt her stomach twist. She wanted to ask him more, to understand the depths of what he meant, but something stopped her, a flicker of caution that whispered she was not yet ready. Weeks passed, and Leora began to notice changes in herself. She was stronger, braver, more willing to explore the palace and its secrets. She discovered rooms long abandoned, corridors that led to hidden gardens, and doors that creaked open to reveal treasures forgotten by time. And always Kale was near, a shadow and a guide, teaching her without words, warning her without fear. One night, as rain poured against the tall windows, Leora overheard whispers in the hallway. Voices, low and urgent, spoke of a curse tied to the Duke's family, of old enemies, of shadows that could not be seen but felt. She pressed herself against the wall, listening, heart racing. They say he is bound, one voice said. The Duke carries something in his blood. A darkness that cannot be touched but can destroy. Bound or not, another replied, he still commands fear. No one dares oppose him openly. But the girl, she is untested. She may be the spark that lights a greater flame, or the one who burns herself in the attempt. Leora's mind whirled. She had known Kale was not ordinary, but she had never imagined this. He was more than a man. He was a force of nature, haunted and powerful, and she was drawn into his orbit whether she wanted to be or not. When she returned to her room, Bramble whining softly, she found Kale waiting in the hall as if he had always known where she had been. You heard them, he said, not accusing but stating. The world judges without understanding, and you are not ready for all its truths. Yet I do not understand, Leora whispered, shaking. I do not understand anything. Why am I here? Why do you watch me so closely? Why am I not afraid? Kale's expression softened for a moment, the mask of calm slipping to reveal something almost human, vulnerability, regret, something she could not name. Because you matter, he said, and because I see the spark I spoke of. Fear is a part of life, yes, but courage is what defines it. You are braver than you know. Days later, Kale took her to the training yard. Though she was delicate, she watched as he moved with grace and strength, demonstrating techniques she could not yet hope to master. Leora tried to mimic his movements, stumbling, falling, and rising again, Bramble barking in encouragement. You have more strength than you believe, Kale said quietly. It is not in the muscles alone, but in the heart, the mind, and the will. You will need all three if you are to survive what is coming. She looked at him, studying the lines of his face, the shadows in his eyes. What is coming? She asked, her voice barely audible. Kale did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied her, measuring her courage, testing her resolve. Finally, he said, the world is not kind to those who are different. You are different, and that difference may save you or destroy you, but I will stand with you, always. The words wrapped around her like a cloak, warm and comforting. She wanted to believe them. She wanted to trust him, even though she knew the truth was never simple. That night, Leora could not sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the wind swirl through the palace, thinking of Kale's words. There was danger ahead, yes, but also a strange sense of possibility. She had survived the judgment of her father, the whispers of servants, and now the mysteries of this palace. Perhaps she could survive this too. But as she stared at the ceiling, she sensed eyes watching her, not human eyes, not entirely. Something beyond understanding, ancient and patient, seemed to linger in the shadows. And she felt the faintest tremor of fear, fear not for herself, but for Cale, for the man who carried the weight of a curse she did not yet understand. For the first time, she wondered if her arrival in this palace had been destiny. Perhaps her life was meant to change, not merely to survive. Perhaps her path was tied to Cale's in ways that neither of them could yet see. And somewhere in the darkened corridors, Cale watched as well, not just as protector, but as someone who felt the weight of unseen forces closing in. Something stirred in the shadows, silent and patient, waiting for the moment to make itself known. Leora curled beneath the covers, Bramble pressed close, and whispered a small prayer she did not know she knew. She was no longer the girl deemed unmarriageable. She was a spark in a world of darkness, a light that might ignite hope or draw danger closer than ever. And she knew in her heart that the night ahead would not be quiet, that the palace was alive with secrets, and that the shadow of the Duke's past would soon reach out to touch them both. The wind moaned through the forest, bending ancient trees under its force. Mist curled around the roots and low branches, hiding shadows that moved like whispers. Leora clutched Bramble to her chest, heart racing. She had never seen the forest this alive, this dangerous. Cale walked ahead of her, steady and calm, as though the swirling fog and the creaking branches posed no threat at all. Yet Leora could feel the tension in his shoulders, the careful way his eyes scanned the darkness. She knew he carried a burden heavier than most men, and tonight it seemed the forest itself tested him. "This way," Cale said, his voice low and deliberate. "Stay close. Do not stray." Leora obeyed, stepping carefully over roots and fallen leaves. Bramble padded silently beside her, alert, ears twitching at every sound. The journey into the forest had been necessary. A threat had arrived at the palace, rumors of enemies who sought the Duke, and through him, those connected to his bloodline. Leora now understood that she too was part of that web. Why are they after you?" Leora asked quietly. "Why does anyone care about me?" Cale did not answer immediately. Instead, he paused at a fork in the path, lowering himself to examine marks etched into the bark of an old tree. The symbols glowed faintly, a muted blue that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "They do not care about you," Cale finally said, voice calm. "Not yet. But your life is tied to mine, and anyone who seeks me will find you as well." Leora shivered, her mind spinning. "But why me?" Cale's gaze softened briefly, and he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Because the world does not distinguish between what is powerful and what is innocent. It only sees opportunity. And you are neither as small nor as weak as you believe." Her heart skipped a beat. His words were meant to reassure, but there was a weight to them that reminded her of danger. She realized she did not only care about what would happen to herself, but about Cale. He carried so much, yet he bore it silently, and for some reason she wanted to share even a fraction of that burden. The forest grew darker, the fog thickening until shadows seemed to dance in front of their eyes. Cale moved with a quiet precision, stepping lightly, drawing upon senses Leora could not hope to match. And yet she followed, driven by curiosity, courage, and the strange pull she felt toward him. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. Bramble barked and growled, low and fierce. Leora looked around, panic rising in her chest. From the fog emerged shapes, figures cloaked in darkness, their eyes glowing like embers. The intruders had found them. "Stay behind me," Cale commanded, his voice sharp, a blade cutting through the mist. He drew a small blade from his belt, moving with a speed and grace that left Leora in awe. The figures approached, silent but deliberate, like predators in a hunt. Leora's hands shook, but she did not flee. She felt a strange power in her chest, a spark that had been growing since arriving at the palace. She took a deep breath and focused, remembering Kale's words about courage and strength. Bramble barked again, nipping at the shadows as if urging her to act. Kale fought with precision, every movement calculated, his blade flashing in the dim light. Leora could see the strain in his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. She wanted to help, but she had no training. Instead, she found herself speaking words she had never spoken aloud, words that seemed to echo through the fog. "Go away," she shouted, her voice trembling at first, then growing steadier. "Leave us." For a moment, the shadows hesitated. Leora felt a warmth in her hands, a faint glow that spread through her chest and to her fingers. The words, the courage, the belief in her own strength, it was enough to push the figures back, if only for a moment. Kale's eyes widened, a rare expression breaking through his calm. "You have power," he said, a mix of astonishment and pride in his voice. "More than I realized." Leora's chest heaved. I didn't know," she admitted, breathless. "I didn't know I could," Kale nodded. "You have always had it. You just needed the right moment to awaken it." He looked at her with an intensity that made her heart flutter. "You are stronger than you believe, and we will need that strength if we are to survive what is coming." The shadowy figures retreated into the mist, leaving only silence, the echoes of their presence lingering in the air. Leora sank to her knees, exhausted, holding Bramble close. Kale knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you hurt?" he asked, though the question seemed secondary to the tension that still radiated from him. "No," she whispered. I think I'm okay." He studied her for a long moment, as if reading her very soul. Then softly he said, "Tonight you have faced more than most do in a lifetime, but this is only the beginning. There is a curse on my bloodline, a shadow that follows me, one that does not forgive and does not forget. You are now a part of this." Leora's breath caught. "A curse?" Kale nodded, his dark eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. "A bond of power and shadow. It has followed me for generations, and now it is tied to you as well." She shook her head, trying to grasp the weight of his words. "Why me? Why would it care about me?" Kale's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that sent warmth through her body. "Because you are connected to me," he said. "And because your courage, your heart, it is the key to surviving it. You may be my anchor, Leora, or my undoing. Only time will tell." For a moment they simply sat in the fog, the night heavy around them. Bramble pressed against Leora's side, sensing the tension, the bond forming between them. Leora realized she did not fear the danger ahead, not entirely. She feared failing Kale, failing herself. And in that fear, she found a strange determination to fight, to grow, to survive. The night passed slowly, the fog curling around the trees like silver smoke. When dawn finally broke, light filtered through the canopy in thin, trembling beams. Leora and Kale had made their way to a clearing, small and hidden, where the forest seemed quieter, almost respectful. Kale looked at her, his expression unreadable, yet softer than she had ever seen. "You did well," he said simply. "Far better than I expected." I was scared," Leora admitted. "But I don't know, I felt like I had to try. For you," Kale's eyes darkened, a storm behind them. "For me," he repeated. "You think of me as someone who must be saved." "No," she said quickly. I think we are bound together. Somehow, and I want to help. I want to be strong, like you said." Kale said nothing, only watched her, and Leora felt the weight of his gaze settle over her like a cloak. For the first time, she understood that he saw her, not just her body, not just her appearance, but her courage, her spark, the small light that had driven the shadows back. "You must remember this," Kale said finally, his voice low and steady. "The curse is not just mine. It will test you, challenge you, tempt you, and it will not forgive weakness, but together we may have a chance." Leora nodded, a tremor of fear and determination in her chest. She did not fully understand what awaited them, but she felt the bond forming between them, stronger than fear, deeper than obligation. She would face the shadows with him. That evening, as they made their way back to the palace, the forest seemed alive in a new way. The wind whispered secrets, the mist swirled like spirits, and every shadow seemed to watch. Leora held Bramble close, feeling his warmth, and felt the bond between her and Kale strengthen with each step. When they reached the palace gates, Kale stopped and turned to her. "Tonight you faced your fear, tomorrow you will face more. The world is not kind, Leora, but it can be fair if we are strong enough." "I will be strong," she said, her voice steady, even fierce. "For you, for us." Kale's lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile. "Good. Because this is only the beginning." As they entered the palace, a shadow detached itself from the walls, silent and patient. It had watched them through the forest, unseen, learning their strengths and weaknesses. Leora did not notice it, but Kale did. His jaw tightened, and for the first time that night, he allowed the faintest flicker of worry to cross his face. The bond between them had been tested, and it had held, but the curse was not finished. And neither were the shadows that moved unseen in the palace and the forest beyond. The first light of dawn filtered through the high windows of the palace, painting the walls in soft gold and rose. Leora sat by the window, Bramble curled at her feet, and watched the courtyard below. The palace seemed calm, peaceful even, but she knew better. Danger was never far. The curse that clung to Kale's bloodline had stirred again, and the shadows were restless. Kale entered silently, as always. He moved with the quiet precision of a predator, but there was a softness in his gaze reserved only for her. Leora turned, meeting his eyes. "Are you ready?" he asked, voice low, measured. "For what?" she replied, though she already knew. The forest, the shadowy figures, the unseen force, tonight it would all culminate. "The curse," Kale said simply. "It will test us fully. Tonight we confront it. There is no turning back." Leora felt her stomach twist, a mixture of fear and determination. She had grown since arriving at the palace, stronger, braver, more certain of herself. Yet the weight of what lay ahead pressed on her chest. She looked at Kale, at the steady strength in his stance, and felt a surge of courage. "Then we face it together," she said firmly. Kale's eyes softened, almost imperceptibly, and he nodded. "Together." Night fell, dark and heavy, cloaking the palace in shadow. The wind howled against the tall windows, carrying whispers of unseen forces. Leora held Bramble close, and Kale stood beside her, his presence a shield she could feel as much as see. They left the palace quietly, moving toward the courtyard and then into the dense forest beyond. The fog lay thick, curling around them, but neither hesitated. Leora felt the spark within her, the power she had discovered in the forest weeks ago, ready to rise again. The heart of the forest awaited, a glade she had never seen before, illuminated by an eerie blue light. Ancient stones were arranged in a circle, covered in moss and glowing faintly, as though the forest itself held its breath. "This is it," Kale whispered, eyes scanning the circle. "The curse tests strength, courage, and heart. It will take everything you have and more." Leora nodded, tightening her grip on Bramble. "I'm ready." The shadows shifted, coalescing into forms that seemed almost human, yet twisted, faceless, dark. The air grew cold, and a low hum vibrated through the ground. Kale stepped forward, blade in hand, but the shadows did not move toward him. Instead, they circled, observing, waiting. "You must face it," Kale said, turning to her. "Not me. You, your courage, your heart, your will, they will determine the outcome." Leora swallowed hard, her pulse racing. She had trained, learned, and grown stronger, but this felt different. The shadows were not just enemies, they were a reflection, a test of her inner fears. She stepped into the center of the circle, Bramble at her side, heart pounding. "Face your fear," Kale whispered. "Do not let it control you." The shadows moved closer, their forms writhing like smoke. Leora felt a chill, a whisper of doubt tugging at her mind. "I am not ready. I am not strong enough." But then she remembered the nights she had spent in the palace, Kale's words of encouragement, the moment in the forest where her courage had pushed back the first shadows. She thought of Bramble, loyal and fearless, and felt warmth spread through her chest. She lifted her hands, speaking the words that came unbidden. "Leave. You have no power over me." The shadows recoiled as if burned. The blue light around the stones intensified, and a warmth, strange and gentle, spread through the clearing. Leora felt energy coursing through her, not just her own power but something older, something alive in the forest itself. Kale watched silently, his eyes wide. "You are stronger than I realized," he murmured. "Stronger than anyone could have imagined." The shadows shrieked, a sound like wind through broken glass, and then dissolved into mist. The forest exhaled, the tension leaving the trees in waves. Leora sank to her knees, exhausted but exhilarated. She looked at Kale, tears of relief and joy welling in her eyes. You did it," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "You faced the curse and survived. Not just survived, you conquered it." "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered, voice trembling. "Your guidance, your strength, you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Kale's hand brushed hers, fingers lingering. "No," he said quietly. "You believed in yourself. I only showed you the way. The courage was always yours. You have grown far beyond what I imagined possible." They stayed in the glade for a long time, the first hints of dawn touching the treetops, painting the mist in pink and gold. Leora felt a lightness she had never known, a freedom born not just from surviving the curse but from discovering her own power. When they returned to the palace, the air felt different, clean, almost sacred. The halls no longer seemed ominous, but alive in a protective way. The portraits of ancestors no longer seemed to judge her, but to watch with quiet approval. Days passed, and the palace slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Yet for Leora, nothing was normal. She had changed, stronger, braver, and more certain of her place in the world. And Kale, he had changed too. She saw it in his eyes, the rare softness, the trust he placed in her, the unspoken acknowledgement that she was no longer merely under his protection, but beside him. One evening, they stood on the balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in crimson and violet. Leora leaned against the railing, bramble at her feet, and looked at Kale. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked, voice quiet. Kale turned, eyes reflecting the sunset. "The curse is never truly gone," he said. "It is a part of my bloodline, but it will no longer control us. You have proven your strength. Together, we are stronger than it ever was." Leora felt warmth flood her chest. "I never thought I could be this brave," she admitted. "I never thought I could face something so terrifying and survive." "You are more than you believe," Kale said softly, stepping closer. "And you have reminded me that even in shadows there can be light. Even in darkness, hope exists." For a long moment they simply stood there, watching the sky change colors, the world alive around them. Leora felt a bond between them stronger than fear, stronger than the curse itself. It was a bond forged in trust, in courage, and in understanding. "Kale," she whispered. He looked at her, his expression unreadable yet gentle. "Yes, I trust you," she said, her voice steady. "I want to stand by your side no matter what comes next." Kale's lips curved in the faintest smile, the first truly warm expression she had seen on his face. "And I trust you, Leora. You have earned a place at my side, not because I need you, but because I choose you." The words wrapped around her like a cloak, comforting, powerful, and filled with promise. Leora felt a lightness in her chest, the kind that comes when fear is replaced by love, trust, and understanding. As night fell over the palace, they walked through the gardens together. The stars glimmered above, reflected in the small fountain at the center. Bramble trotted beside them, tail wagging, sensing the peace that had finally settled over their lives. In the quiet, Kale took her hand, a gesture of trust and partnership, and Leora felt the bond between them solidify, not as protector and charge, but as equals, companions, and something more profound. "There will be challenges ahead," Kale said softly, breaking the silence. "Enemies who wait for weakness, shadows that may return, but we will face them together, and whatever comes, we will endure." "I know," Leora said, squeezing his hand, "and I am ready, because with you I feel stronger than ever before." The moon rose high, casting silver light over the gardens. For the first time, Leora felt a sense of belonging, of purpose, and of hope. The curse had tested them, but it had also brought them together. They had faced fear, darkness, and the unknown, and emerged stronger, bound not just by circumstance, but by courage, trust, and love. Kale looked at her, eyes reflecting the moonlight and the quiet pride he rarely showed. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "The world is wide and there is much yet to see and do, but we will face it together." Leora smiled, feeling a warmth that spread through her entire being. "Together," she echoed. And as they stood there, hand in hand, bramble at their feet, the palace around them alive with quiet magic, Leora realized something profound. She was no longer the girl deemed unmarriageable. She was strong, brave, and capable. She was part of a bond that had survived the shadows, the curse, and the unknown. And in Kale, she had found not just a protector, but a partner, a companion, a guide, and perhaps, in time, something even deeper. The stars above shimmered like tiny promises, the world around them full of possibilities, and for the first time in her life, Leora felt that the future was truly hers to claim. The curse had not been vanquished, it never could be fully erased. But its power over them had been broken, and in its place grew trust, strength, and a bond that would endure whatever darkness might come. The palace was quiet, the shadows held at bay, and Leora knew one thing with certainty. They had survived, they had grown, and together they could face anything.